Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swami Netapaharine. Most of us devotees, we sometimes say Sri Ramakrishna was a great bhakta, Holy Mother was a bhakta, but Swamiji, Swami Vivekananda, was a jnani. He wasn't so much of a bhakta. I think this is based on a one-sided understanding of Swamiji's life and teachings. And so I wanted to discuss Swamiji's bhakti today and how he beautifully combined jnana and bhakti, both in his life and in his teachings. I won't be able to discuss everything in detail, but just give you a hint of the idea that I had. So to begin with, I wanted to start with something that Swamiji told Sister Nivedita, his disciple Nivedita, toward the end of his life. And this is in Nivedita's own words. What she said was, according to Swamiji, Ramakrishna, while seeming to be all bhakti, was really within all jnana. But he himself, Swamiji himself, apparently all jnana, was full of bhakti, and that thereby he was apt to be as weak as any woman. So I think this is a very helpful statement for understanding the relationship between Thakur and Swamiji. So Thakur was a bhakta on the outside and a jnani on the inside. Swamiji was a jnani on the outside and a bhakta on the inside. And we can begin to understand Swamiji's bhakti by looking carefully at how he was trained by Sri Ramakrishna in those 5 years that he visited Sri Ramakrishna from 1882 to 1886. How was he trained by Sri Ramakrishna? And one thing that I think many of us overlook is the fact that, this is my opinion, and I'll just share my view, and you can think about it for yourselves as you study the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna by yourselves. I believe if you study the Gospel very carefully, you'll find that Sri Ramakrishna trains Swamiji in 2 phases. The first phase is from 1882 to 1884, and the second phase from 1884 to 1886. So let me explain briefly these 2 phases. So the first phase, 1882 to 1884. This is when famously in the second meeting, the second visit of Naren, Swamiji, to Sri Ramakrishna in Dakshineshwar, Thakur touched him on the chest and he immediately went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And he said, what about my parents? What will happen to them? So that was his first taste of Advaitic Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And in that same period, in that early period of Sri Ramakrishna's training of Swamiji, Sri Ramakrishna encouraged him to read and study carefully and practice Ashtavakra Samhita. Most of us know this, which is a hardcore Advaitic text. So in that first period, between 1882 and 1884, Sri Ramakrishna was training Swamiji to be a kind of Advaita Vedantin, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, along those lines. I want Nirvikalpa Samadhi, that kind of idea. But that's where his training began, because what Sri Ramakrishna was doing was weaning him away from his affiliation, his leanings toward Brahma Samaj. At the time he was a member of the Brahma Samaj, and he believed in Nirakara Saguna Brahman, the idea that he believed in the personal God, but a personal God that's formless. So he didn't believe in Advaita Vedanta. So what Sri Ramakrishna first did is he gave him a kind of a strong shot of Advaita Vedanta, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. In the second phase, where does the second phase begin? I said 1884, but I can date it more precisely. Swamiji's father died on the 25th of February, 1884. And it was a huge shock to Swamiji and to his entire family. And they immediately went into dire poverty because his family didn't have much money after his father died. And Swamiji was trying to find food for himself, for his family. And in that kind of desperate state, he approached Sri Ramakrishna at some point. We don't know the exact date, but he approached Sri Ramakrishna one time, sometime in 1884 most likely. And he said, Sri Ramakrishna, Thakur, since you're so close to Kali, to the Divine Mother, if you pray to the Mother for my family, then surely my family will have basic food and clothing. And Sri Ramakrishna says, Are, you don't accept Mother, why are you telling me? Go to the temple yourself and pray to Mother for whatever you want. And he said, okay. So he went one evening to the Dakshineshwar temple. Most of you know this. And the moment he saw the beautiful divine murti of Kali, he forgot all about his family and his family's needs. And he could only pray for bhakti and dispassion and realization. And then, I won't repeat this because most of you know this, but he went back to Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna said, Are, did you ask for your family's welfare? He said, no, I forgot. And then he went back another 2 times. So this thing repeated itself many times. Finally, he realized that Sri Ramakrishna was playing a trick on him. And after that day, Sri Ramakrishna himself, this is recorded, Sri Ramakrishna says, Naren would not accept the Divine Mother before, but did so yesterday. Yesterday means that event. Isn't it wonderful that Narendra has accepted Mother? And much later, years later, toward the end of his life, Swamiji told Nivedita, referring to this incident most likely, he said, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa dedicated me to her, to Kali, on that day. And you know, I believe that she guides me in every little thing I do and just does what she likes with me. So this incident was extremely important. This was the incident that made Swamiji accept the reality of Shakti, the Divine Mother. So that's one important event. But you'll also find, if you study the Gospel from 1884 to 1886, that Sri Ramakrishna is training Swamiji in a very different way from what he was doing before. So if you look at it carefully, what you'll find is that Sri Ramakrishna, instead of teaching Swamiji about the Jnani's Advaita, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, he's teaching him his own Vijnana Vedanta philosophy, the idea that Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam, that not only Jini Nirgun Tini Shogun. So he explicitly, so I'll mention 4 main doctrines that he taught Swamiji in the second phase between 1884 and 1886. The first doctrine, the divine reality is not only impersonal, but also personal. In Bangla, he taught Jini Nirgun Tini Shogun. So on 11th March 1885, for instance, he directly tells Naren this. He says, Kali is none other than Brahman. That which is Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, is also Kali. Kali is the primal Shakti. When the divine reality is Nishkriya, inactive, I call it Brahman. And when it creates, preserves, and destroys, I call it Shakti or Kali. What you call Brahman, I call Kali. Brahman and Kali are abheda, inseparable. So he clearly teaches Naren that you should accept that the ultimate reality is both Nirguna and Saguna. That's the first thing he taught him. Second, what about this world? Is it real or is it unreal? What Sri Ramakrishna teaches him, this is again on the same date, 11th March 1885, he teaches Naren, these 3, Brahman, the world, and living beings, Brahman, Jagat, and Jiva, together constitute one reality. Jeev, Jagat, Bishishto Brahma, Shab Jodiye Ekti. That's the original Bangla. So he's teaching Swamiji that you don't look upon this world as unreal. Look upon this entire world as a manifestation of God. And with regard to that teaching, he also, around sometime in 1886, just before Sri Ramakrishna left his body in August of 1886, Sri Ramakrishna went to him and said, please Thakur, please give me Nirvikalpa Samadhi. That's what I want most. And Sri Ramakrishna scolded him. And most of us know this. I'll just repeat it once because it's very important in this context. Sri Ramakrishna tells him, shame on you. You are asking for such an insignificant thing. I thought you would be like a great banyan tree and that thousands of people would rest in your shade. But now I see that you are seeking your own liberation. There is a state higher than that. It is you who sing, O Lord, thou art all that exists. So again, Sri Ramakrishna is reminding Swamiji, you were not born here. You didn't take this body to be a jnani, just to get some ordinary thing like Nirvikalpa Samadhi. You're here to be a vijnani and to help others. You are already liberated. You have to help others attain salvation. So that's the second doctrine. The world is a real manifestation of God. Third, Sri Ramakrishna taught Swamiji not the narrow idea that only Jnana Yoga, the path of Jnana, leads to moksha, but that all 4 yogas lead directly to liberation. He says this, for instance, this is Sri Ramakrishna. The Jnani's path leads to truth, as does the path that combines Jnana and Bhakti. The Bhakta's path too leads to truth. Jnana Yoga is true and Bhakti Yoga is true. God can be realized through all paths. This is another fundamental teaching that Sri Ramakrishna taught to Naren. And fourth, he taught this very important doctrine of Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva. Most of you know this. There's one incident in when Sri Ramakrishna is talking about Vaishnava sadhanas, and one of them is daya, having compassion toward other living beings. And Sri Ramakrishna suddenly goes into a state of bhava and says, daya, compassion, why compassion? How compassion? We're ordinary creatures. Only God can have compassion. For us, Shivagyane Jiva Seva. We should serve others in a spirit of worship by seeing God in everyone. And this, Naren was present on that occasion, and Naren was so moved by this. He took the other people, the visitors, aside and said, what Sri Ramakrishna taught is very, very profound. So he was very moved by this idea that we can develop an entire ethics of service, of seva, based on this Vijnana idea that there's nothing but God in this world. And on 11th March 1886, this is recorded in the Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna specifically tells Naren, but the doctrine of Maya, this Advaitic idea, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, but the doctrine of Maya is dry. Maya Shukno, he says in Bangla. To Narendra, repeat what I said. Narendra, Maya is dry. Maya Shukno. Ramakrishna affectionately stroked Narendra's face and hands and said, your face and hands show that you are a bhakta, but the jnani has different features. They are dry. Even after attaining jnana, the jnani can live in the world, retaining vidya maya, the maya of knowledge. That is to say, bhakti, compassion, renunciation, and such virtues. So Sri Ramakrishna is explicitly telling Naren, you are not a jnani, you are a vijnani bhakta. You are equally a jnani and a bhakta. You're here to be a vijnani and to help others. And in another place he says, this is recorded in Leela Prasanga, could one who is a dry jnani have such eyes? Jnana and feminine bhakti are blended in you. So again and again, Sri Ramakrishna is telling him, you are not born to be a jnani, but to be a vijnani, and to combine jnana and bhakti. Now, when we study the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, these 9 volumes, we should always keep in mind these 2 phases in Sri Ramakrishna's training of Naren, the young Narendra. From 1882 to 1884, he first moved Swamiji away from Brahma Samaj to Advaita Vedanta, Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. The only reality is Nirguna Brahman. Everything else is unreal. The aim of life is to attain Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But the second phase is equally important, if not more important. Between 1884 and 1886, he moved Swamiji away from what we can call a world negating Advaita Vedanta and moved him toward, led him to embrace a world affirming Advaita philosophy. That's what I call Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta philosophy. Brahma Satyam Jagat Satyam. This world itself is God. Shakti is also real. And through Bhakti Yoga, we can also attain the highest. Now, where does Swamiji say this? You'll find it all over the place in the complete works. So for instance, remember I mentioned 4 main doctrines that Sri Ramakrishna taught Swamiji. You'll find in Swamiji's lectures the same 4 doctrines, taught in a slightly different language. He lectured in English mostly. So I'll give you some examples. So number 1, just as Sri Ramakrishna taught Swamiji Brahma Shakti Abhed, that Nirguna Brahman and the personal Shakti are different aspects of the same divine reality, Swamiji said, this is from one of his lectures, he says, the absolute being of whom we can predicate nothing, so this is that Nirguna Brahman, has its powers spoken of as she. That is, the real personal God in India is she. This Shakti of the Brahman is always in the feminine gender. So almost word for word, Swamiji is repeating what Sri Ramakrishna taught him many years earlier, that Brahman and Shakti are different aspects of the same reality. And in another place, in another lecture, Swamiji says, our religion preaches an impersonal, personal God. Exactly like what Sri Ramakrishna said, Jini Nirgun Tini Shagun. That which is Nirguna is also Saguna. Swamiji is just using the English words, impersonal and personal. Second doctrine. Remember that Sri Ramakrishna taught Swamiji in that second phase, between 1884 and 1886. This world is not unreal, it is a real manifestation of God. Brahman has become everything in this world. Similarly, Swamiji, you'll find this is one of the keynotes of Swamiji's lectures. One of his lectures, in fact, is titled God in Everything. And it's a beautiful interpretation of the Isha Upanishad. And in that discussion of Isha Upanishad, he explains how he understands Vedanta and how he understands Advaita Vedanta. What he says is, this is a direct quotation from this lecture, God in Everything. He says, here I can only lay before you what the Vedanta seeks to teach, and that is the deification of the world. That is that there's nothing but God. He says, the Vedanta does not in reality denounce the world. It does not say Jagat Mithya. It really means deification of the world, giving up the world as we think of it, as we know it, as it appears to us, and to know what it really is. Deify it. It is God alone. So this is, again, just putting in English exactly what Sri Ramakrishna taught him. Just as Sri Ramakrishna said that the Vijnani sees that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles, Swamiji is saying the true Advaita Vedanta does not teach that the world is unreal. It teaches that everything in this world is a real manifestation of God. You should see God in everything. Third doctrine, remember that Sri Ramakrishna taught Swamiji that there are so many different paths leading to the same goal of liberation. You can attain God through jnana, but also through bhakti, and also through karma, and also through Raja Yoga. Swamiji says exactly the same thing. In an 1896 lecture, Swamiji says, each one of our yogas is fitted to make man perfect, even without the help of the others, because they have all the same goal in view. The yogas of work, karma yoga, of wisdom, jnana yoga, and of devotion, bhakti yoga, are all capable of serving as direct and independent means for the attainment of moksha. Now the fourth doctrine. Remember, Sri Ramakrishna is the one who taught Swamiji the doctrine of Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva. As a Vijnani, seeing God in everyone in this world, in every creature, you should serve everyone in a spirit of worship. This is what Swamiji, in his 1896 lectures in London, called practical Vedanta. He has a series of 4 lectures. He called all of them practical Vedanta. And what he meant by practical Vedanta is what Sri Ramakrishna meant by Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva. So in one of these lectures, Swamiji says it very explicitly. He says, but what is more practical than worshiping here, worshiping you? I see you, feel you, and I know you are God. The Mohammedan says there is no God but Allah. The Vedanta says, and here I'm saying this is the Vedanta of Sri Ramakrishna, this is Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. The Vedanta says there is nothing that is not God. The living God is within you, and yet you are building churches and temples and believing all sorts of imaginary nonsense. The only God to worship is the human soul in the human body. This is Swamiji's practical Vedanta. And you'll also find that after lecturing in the West for so many years, he came back to India. And toward the end of his life, he was full of bhakti. And one of the important incidents that happened was when he was traveling in the Himalayas and he visited the Kshir Bhavani temple, where he saw it in a very dilapidated condition. And he just thought to himself for a moment, he said, he was thinking, Are, Divine Mother, she's so powerful, she's the mother of the universe, but she couldn't protect her own temple from Muslim invaders. The moment he thought that, Divine Mother started speaking to Swamiji, and it was an overwhelming experience for him. And she told him, what can you do? Shall I protect you or shall you protect me? She tells him this, and this completely changed his entire attitude. And Swamiji himself tells Sharat Chandra Chakraborty, one of his disciples, about this incident. He says, since hearing that divine voice, I cherish no more plans. The idea of building mutts, etc., I have given up. As Mother wills, so it will be. He became just a pure bhakta toward the end of his life. In a letter to another one of his disciples, Sister Christine, the date was 25th October 1898, just 4 years before he left his body. Swamiji wrote, never mind, Mother knows what is best for us. She will show the way. I am now in bhakti. As I am growing old, bhakti is taking the place of jnana. He explicitly says this. And in another letter, just 2 years before he left his body, on 12th April 1900, he says, Swamiji says, I am Mother's child. She works, she plays. Why should I plan? What should I plan? Things came and went just as she liked, without my planning. We are her automata. She is the wire puller. This is just his language for putting what Sri Ramakrishna would often say, Tini jontro, ami jontro, tini jontri. I am just an instrument. The Divine Mother is the wire puller, the one who is acting through me. And just a few months after that, on 17th June 1900, he wrote in a letter to Mary Hale, Kali worship is my special fad. So externally, he would teach Advaita Vedanta, Jnana, many things, but privately he was just a great bhakta of Kali actually. And he has a beautiful poem on Kali where you get his true feelings about Divine Mother. And you should always remember that the second Arati song was composed by Swamiji himself. And the refrain, the repeated line there is, Tasmat Tvam Eva Sharanam Mama Dina Bandhu. This is pure bhakti, pure surrender. It's just surrendering at the feet of the Divine Mother. That's the entire song. That was Swamiji's, we can say, his private bhava, the one that he didn't advertise so much. But it's what he felt most deeply within him, and especially toward the end of his life. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and if you're interested in more details, I've written an entire book on Swamiji's philosophy. It'll be published by Oxford most likely in December of this year, just in about 6 months, so stay tuned. Let us pray to Thakur Ma and Swamiji so that we can attain purity, dispassion, jnana, and bhakti in this very life. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.